Hi, I've been following your channel for a while now, and I was wondering if you also read creepy, strange, or paranormal encounters on your platform. I listened to your video entitled, "I Encountered a Demon in New York," and it was 100% unnerving. Anyways, this is the only strange encounter I've had so far, and I still don't believe in it. My coworkers told me that whenever you're alone, especially at noon and dusk, you'll hear frantic typing coming from a particular open space workstation. I didn't believe them, but my manager, who was left alone while we all had lunch, was pale as a ghost when we got back. He said, "I'm so glad you guys are back. I heard typing." We talked and laughed about it. Until I worked the night shift, alone, in a rented condo space office with extremely dimmed yellow lights. The company I worked for was a startup and was cheap as hell. I was sleepy, so I figured I'd take a quick nap. Then I heard it. The typing. It was so loud and fast that it freaked me out. And whenever I stared at the corner where the typing was coming from, it completely stopped. What the hell? So I went to work, but the typing was still there. It would only stop whenever I stared at the area keyboard. I tried to be sneaky and only use my peripheral vision to see the ghost, but I hardly saw the keys being pressed because of these stupid cheap lights. But the typing never stopped. At this point, I was sweating like crazy, my heart was racing, and I was scared as hell, but I couldn't leave the office. It was my first job, and I was afraid of getting fired. So I talked loudly and said, "You can do whatever you want, just don't do anything to me," and continued to work. After about 3 a.m., it disappeared. After my shift, I talked about the experience to my coworkers, who didn't believe me. Ironic. I heard some scary stories from the guards at the condo we rented, but I'll share them to you another time. I'm a big fan of the supernatural, but I'm a coward who doesn't actively search for it. Better safe than sorry, as they say. But I've got a lot of stories I've heard from friends and family, though. Here's one of them. When my dad was still starting a family with my mom in the 80s, he was driving trailer trucks for a living. Some hauls needed overnight deliveries, so he was driving this open-type trailer truck all night with only one helper. They were hauling large metal rods that time, so the helper decided to go up the truck to act as counterweight and ensure no stray tree branches could trip the rods during travel. When they were passing this dark highway where there were forests on the left and right side, my dad heard a loud bang in the back. He thought something might have fallen, but the helper signaled that everything was okay. 2 taps on the roof for go, 3 quick taps for stop. So my dad didn't stop. Only when they were near a city did the helper signal to stop and get inside the driver's side. He was sweating profusely, and my dad asked what happened. He just said to go and don't stop. When they finally entered the city, the helper said that an Aswang hitchhiked in the back of the truck and recounted what happened. The helper was facing the front when he heard a loud bang on his back. When he looked behind, he saw red eyes and a splayed pair of bat-like wings. He immediately tapped the roof to go, faced forward, and started praying the rosary. But due to nervousness, he kept repeating, "Our Father," over and over again. He kept hearing growling noises and heavy breathing on his back. When the helper noticed that there was no more noise in his back, he made my dad stop the truck and get inside. My dad says it was around 20 to 30 minutes since the loud bang, but the helper felt it was like an hour that he was praying. I tend to lean toward logic and science. Growing up, I didn't believe in Aswang, ghosts, or any supernatural entities. Still, there are moments that defy explanation. I can think of 2 such experiences in my life. I graduated from a public high school in Iloilo City, where I served as vice president of the student council. One evening, we stayed at school until around 7 p.m. to prepare for an event the next day. I got upset with someone, though I cannot recall the exact reason, and walked out of our office to cool off. Our school had a balete tree, or lunok in Hiligaynon. While standing outside, I happened to look up at the tree and saw a tall, shadowy figure. It had glowing eyes and hair that stood on end. Locally, people call this entity a mantiu on Panay Island. It's somewhat similar to the Slender Man, but looks far more intimidating. I ran off quickly and never told anyone, as I did not want them to think I was losing my mind. The other experience happened during college, around 2009. I frequently visited an internet cafe within walking distance of my house. I was friends with the owner's nephews, so I often stayed there overnight. At the time, I was hooked on a private server for Ragnarok Online and regularly saw a call center worker who also frequented the cafe. We were not close friends, though we exchanged small talk occasionally. One night, around 3 a.m., I was alone in the cafe as the attendant was asleep. The door to the cafe was open, and I noticed the call center worker standing there, just looking inside. I asked if he wanted to play and offered to wake the attendant, but he just stood silently for about 3 minutes before leaving. I ignored it, but I avoided going back to the cafe for 3 days. When I finally returned, I learned that the call center worker had died around 10 p.m. the day before I saw him at the cafe. I never shared this encounter with anyone. Even now, I hesitate to believe what I saw. Part of me feels certain because I saw it firsthand, yet another part rationalizes that the manta was likely a projection of my anger, or that the apparition of the call center worker was due to stress and lack of sleep from gaming. I died and went to hell. The other night, a few friends and I got together, and after a couple of drinks, we started reminiscing about the strange things that happened back in high school. One friend brought up the time I technically died, an incident I'd nearly buried in the back of my mind. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that maybe it was worth writing down, so here I am, sharing it with you all. I believe it was my junior year when this happened. The exact day is still fuzzy to me, but the details are unforgettable. I'd been playing football since 4th grade, and it was a given that I'd keep it up in high school. I wasn't exactly Tom Brady, but I was a solid center. I remember it was a night game because the stadium lights were glaring down on us, and our receivers kept grumbling that they couldn't see the ball because of the light. The entire day leading up to the game, I had this gnawing feeling, like that uneasy guilt you get when you've done something wrong, like lying to your parents or breaking something you shouldn't have. It was this weird premonition that something was off. Even minutes before the game, as the usual music blared over the stadium speakers, that same feeling of dread just wouldn't go away. Near the end of the 4th quarter, we huddled up for what I thought would be one of the last plays of the game. The play was called, we lined up, the ball snapped, and then nothing. Just total darkness. I couldn't see a thing. I could hear voices, some shouting, but they gradually faded away. My whole body felt immobilized, almost like sleep paralysis, where you're aware but trapped in place. Slowly, the darkness started to lift, and I felt my body loosening up, like I was coming out of some kind of fog. When I could fully see again, I realized I wasn't on the field anymore. In fact, I had no clue where I was or how I'd gotten there. My mind was racing, piecing together any logical answer. I figured I'd taken a hard hit, blacked out, and was probably in a hospital. But things weren't adding up. The room was way too dark, and there was none of the usual hospital equipment or even a bed. I was just lying on the floor. The only hint that I might be in some medical setting was that my football gear had been swapped for what looked like a gown. Then my brain did what brains tend to do. It tried to make sense of the situation, scrambling to rationalize what felt totally irrational. I still clung to the idea that I must be in a hospital, that maybe I was just in some kind of weird post-concussion daze. But as those thoughts churned, my body kicked into gear, urging me to get up and look around. Slowly, I lifted myself off the floor and headed toward what looked like an exit, desperate to figure out where I actually was. As I started walking, I took in everything around me. The walls were covered in a strange, ashy substance that clung to every surface, leaving dark smudges wherever I touched them. They had an odd heat to them, not scalding, but hot enough that if I pressed my hand against them for too long, I was sure they'd leave a mark. The floor, just like the walls, was coated in that same layer of ash, a gritty, unyielding material beneath my bare feet. The room soon stretched into a hallway, and it felt like it went on forever. I'm pretty sure I walked for hours, maybe even longer, with nothing changing. Ash and scuffs started to cover my gown, clinging to me like dust to a chalkboard. Just as exhaustion began to creep in, I saw a faint light ahead, and a sound, faint at first, began to fill my ears. It was a crackling sound, like fire, intense and relentless. As I got closer, the pieces began to fall into place. The heat on the walls, the ash on the floor, it was all connected. But even as I thought I understood, I wasn't prepared for what waited beyond the hall. When I finally stepped out, the only word that came to mind was hell. The sky, if I could call it that, was thick with smoke, with only the slightest hint of an orange glow piercing through. Massive mountains, taller than anything I'd ever seen, rose like dark shadows in the distance, casting an eerie backdrop to this nightmare. Strange, tormented creatures roamed the ground and filled the air, each one looking as if it were in eternal agony. And then I heard them. The screams. The horror of what I was seeing had drowned out the noise at first, but now the endless chorus of screams filled every part of me. Billions of voices, all crying out in pain, their tones desperate, pleading, tortured. People were scattered across this landscape, each one locked in their own private hell. Some were burning, others were twisted into grotesque shapes I couldn't comprehend, and many were enduring brutal, unimaginable tortures. I could do nothing but watch in paralyzed horror. Suddenly, I felt a sharp, tearing pain. I looked down to see something clawing at my leg, a creature with the body of a snake, but limbs that hadn't fully formed, as if its skin had never quite adapted to the grotesque new limbs. I yelped, shaking it off with a swift kick, but before I could even catch my breath, a hand grabbed my arm. I froze, my eyes moving slowly up the exposed, ash-covered muscles of the arm until I met its owner's gaze. He was almost beautiful, in a haunting, nightmarish way. His eyes were as dark as coal. His skin like burnished bronze, marred with whip-like scars and covered in ash. He held my arm firmly, as if telling me not to resist. He spoke, but the words sounded foreign, twisted like a language I couldn't quite grasp. Before I could pull away, he tugged at my arm, and despite every instinct screaming to run, I followed him, that clawed snake creature still scratching at my legs as we moved. We descended a long, steep staircase, each step pulling me deeper into this place. My guide made sure I saw everything. The tortures grew more horrific with each passing second. People were boiled, crushed, twisted, gouged. My stomach churned, but somehow I couldn't vomit. It was as if even that small release had been stolen from me. We kept moving, and the scenes of suffering only intensified. I saw herds of grotesque creatures feasting, tearing into bodies that seemed unable to die. They devoured and mutilated, but those who suffered just lay there, eyes vacant, resigned to this new, unimaginable existence. The more I saw, the clearer it became that this place was beyond any nightmare I could have conjured. It was as if I'd been dropped into the heart of something eternal, a torment without end, a realm of suffering that defied understanding. And yet something told me my journey through this hell was just beginning. My brain just couldn't process what was happening anymore. I kept trying to convince myself that I was just dreaming, that it was all some weird side effect of being concussed. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. Everything, the heat, the scratching at my leg, the man's hand gripping my arm, it all felt so disturbingly real. It seemed like days had passed since I woke up in that dark room. As we kept walking, I got a closer look at the mountains I'd seen earlier. They weren't made of rock. They were entirely built of bones, some clearly human, others from creatures I couldn't even begin to identify. I looked up at the sky, or whatever it was, and watched these huge winged creatures gliding through the smoky clouds. They would block out the orange rays here and there as they circled, casting an even darker shadow over this endless nightmare. We walked and walked, and though the snake-like creature had finally stopped scratching at my leg, it was only because it had scraped down to the bone. I could still feel every bit of it, the exposed muscles and nerves in my calf shifting with each painful step. But no matter how intense the pain, I couldn't scream. I just kept moving, almost like I was on autopilot. Then, suddenly, the man stopped. He turned toward me, his black eyes empty and piercing, and pointed at something ahead. I followed his finger and saw a pit. As we approached, I peered over the edge, and my stomach twisted. Thousands of people were crammed together at the bottom, clawing over each other, desperate to get out. Then, I noticed these small holes along the pit's walls, thick, scalding red liquid beginning to pour out of them, spilling onto the people below. Some tried to swim to the surface, screaming in agony, only to be pulled back down by others. Eventually, the pit drained, leaving them all still fighting, still screaming. I backed away from the edge, my heart pounding. The man's gaze bore into me as he gestured toward the pit again. He spoke, but I couldn't understand him. The words sounded guttural, twisted. Yet somehow, I knew exactly what he meant. He wanted me to get in. I felt pure terror spike through me. I yanked my arm back, trying to break free. He pulled me closer, holding me tight. I tried harder, yanking and pulling as hard as I could, until to my shock, he let go. He just stood there, watching me, his mouth moving in that strange language. I didn't think. I ran. I ran as fast as I could, away from him, away from that pit. I ran for what felt like days, maybe even weeks, never stopping, my lungs burning, my legs numb. Every time I glanced back, though, it seemed like I'd barely moved an inch. But I didn't care. I just kept going. I could feel them, those creatures, breathing down my neck, their heat close behind, their horrible growls and the crackling of fire filling my ears. I just closed my eyes, screamed, and ran, driven by pure desperation. Then all of a sudden, "Ah!" I screamed, jolting upright. My body was drenched in sweat, my breathing frantic. As I opened my eyes, I saw two paramedics leaning over me, their eyes wide in shock. They both jumped back, then quickly tried to calm me down, telling me to lie back. My eyes darted around, piecing together where I was. An ambulance. I laid back as they checked me over, one of them explaining what had happened. During the game, right after I snapped the ball, a defender had knocked me to the ground. My heart stopped. My coach had started CPR while they rushed over, continuing compressions and doing everything they could to revive me. I'd been gone for almost 9 minutes. They were ready to declare me dead, until my heart suddenly started beating again. As I lay there, processing it all, I couldn't hold back the tears. The memories of that other place, the searing pain, the terrifying pit, it all came flooding back, and I just cried. The doctors could easily explain why my heart stopped. They had 1,000 logical reasons ready, but they could never explain the scars that appeared on my legs when I came to. Nor could they explain the extensive damage to my lungs, as if I'd been breathing in thick, choking smoke for years. These signs didn't match up with a few minutes of a heart being stopped during a football game. I started making regular visits to the doctor to keep my heart checked, and I learned to accept their explanations. They told me what happened, and I listened, nodding as they reassured me it was just a freak accident on the field. But there was one part of the story they couldn't address, the part that still haunted me, the memory of where I went while my heart had stopped. I was in that hellish place for what felt like months, even though it was only minutes in real time. The sensations, the pain, the heat, the crushing fear, had all felt disturbingly real. Sometimes I still feel my legs bleeding, and I look down, staring at those scars. They're like a permanent reminder that maybe it wasn't just my imagination. I've tried explaining what I saw to people. Most say it was just my brain reacting to trauma, creating a kind of placeholder reality while my body fought to stay alive. And for a long time, I clung to that idea, convincing myself that it was all just my mind's way of coping. But even now, when I'm alone and everything is silent, it feels like a part of me is still there. I can still hear the screams of those people, the low growls of those beasts, the heavy, suffocating scent of smoke, and the crackling of flames. All of it is still with me, tormenting me like an echo I can't escape. It's as if they're calling out to me, telling me I'm not really free, like they're saying I somehow belong to that place now, as if my escape was temporary and one day I'll have to return. And in the quiet moments when I close my eyes, I can see the people in that pit. Sometimes I even hear those wretched words again, faint but clear. I might not understand the language, but I know what they mean. They cut through the sounds of fire and screams, calm and insistent, whispering to me, "Get in." I don't know if any of you have ever heard about a pukong. We pronounce it as puchong. It's a ghost that haunts people. So this happened 4 years ago when my sister-in-law's father died due to cancer. Her father wasn't really on good terms with my mom because he had a bad attitude. In our Muslim tradition, when a person dies, they are buried the next day. My mom is super kind. She's an angel, I swear. So we joined the burial because we also wanted to visit Papa, our dad. After the burial, we did pagpag, a Filipino tradition of stopping somewhere after a wake to shake off bad spirits, because my mom really believes in it. That night, we went to bed early since we had school the next day. I was shocked when my mom suddenly scratched me. It turns out she was having a nightmare. So I sat up quickly and saw my siblings trying to wake her up too. When my mom finally woke up, that's when we heard my brothers outside shouting loudly. They were knocking on the door, so we opened it right away. My brother said that Mom had been screaming for a while and her voice echoed through the entire house, and they were wondering why we weren't waking up. My mom didn't want to tell us what she dreamed about because she knew we would get scared, so we all just went back to sleep. Then, that same night, we woke up again because our eldest sibling knocked to ask if we were okay. He was surprised because he found our 5 older brothers in the living room. My brothers said that someone had thrown a rotten eggplant at their feet, since they don't close the windows when they sleep because they prefer fresh air. They said it smelled rotten, like a dead rat. They decided to go outside to check around, but they didn't see anything unusual. One of my brothers was about to step outside the gate, but our eldest told them to come back inside because he saw the poochong standing by the bathroom. Its head was tilted, and it was completely wrapped in white cloth, like a mummy. The next day, none of us went to school because many of us had a fever and stomach pains. That's when Mom finally told us about her dream. She saw the deceased lying down with a snake coiled around him. He was asking for forgiveness while crying. We thought it was over, that he would only visit for one night. But we were wrong. We suffered for an entire week. Second night after the burial, the following things took place. We were so confident that it wouldn't happen again, so our day went by like normal. This happened around 11 p.m. We were all sleeping, and us girls were squeezed into Mom's room because no one wanted to sleep in the living room. I woke up because it was really hot. Even though the AC was on full blast, it still felt weirdly hot. So I sat up and looked at my sisters who were squeezed next to me. Then I arranged them because it was just so hot. I lay back down, but I still couldn't sleep, so I got up and turned on the electric fan. When I lay down again, I stared at our curtains because they were new, and I didn't like them since they were too light. Because Mom replaced them with something thin, they were easily blown by the air from the fan. I was about to close my eyes because I really wanted to sleep, but suddenly the curtain was blown hard by the wind, and I saw the moon outside. It was a full moon that night. The wind blew the curtain again, and that's when I saw the poochong standing there, and its head was tilted to the side. I was like paralyzed at that moment, because when the curtain covered the window again, I didn't see any shadow. I remembered what Papa used to say, that if something or someone doesn't have a shadow, it could be a demon or an Aswang. I don't even know how I fell asleep that night, but the next day, I came down with a fever. I told my mom about what happened, and that afternoon we placed sharp wooden sticks around the windows and doors. Third night after the wake, around 10 p.m., the following events happened. My brothers were still watching a movie in our living room. They were in the middle of watching when they heard something outside. It didn't sound like a person walking because they didn't hear slippers. Instead, it sounded like something hopping, like a rabbit. The impact was loud, as if it was really jumping, so they looked outside but they didn't see anything. One of my brothers, who's a bit paranoid, thought it was a thief, so he shouted, which woke up our eldest brother. They decided to check the surroundings again to see if someone had entered, but they didn't find anything. The next day we were surprised because our quiet brother, who lives at the back, we live in a compound by the way, had breakfast at the main house. My mom asked him what was wrong because he looked stressed. It turned out that when all my brothers had gone inside the house last night, the poochong had moved to the abandoned storage room connected to my brother's house. Since the storage room was only made of wood, you could really hear and feel if something was hopping in there. According to my brother, he was preparing milk for my niece when he suddenly heard something fall in the next room, but he ignored it. My brother is brave. He's the bravest among us, whether it's a person or an Aswang. In fact, my mom used to say that my brother had a best friend who was a capre, and he would talk to it before. But that night, my brother really felt chills because something was hopping in the next room, and he knew right away what it was. But even with that, his bravery won over. Since there was an open space above because my brother's house didn't have a ceiling, he poured a bucket of water into the next room, because our grandma used to say that it's afraid of water and sharp objects. Since the spirit of the deceased kept visiting, my mom asked my uncle, who's an imam, what we could do to stop it. My uncle told my mom that she should go to the grave of the deceased and talk to it. So that same day, my mom and our eldest went to the grave, and she spoke to the deceased, saying that she had forgiven them and asked that they stop disturbing us. Believe it or not, I encountered a creature that I think was a mananangal, but it was very different from the depictions I heard in stories as a child. This mananangal could actually fly even in the morning. It happened in the afternoon. As a kid, I loved to go fruit picking with other children. We were messing around with a mango tree. Because the mangoes were so high up, we were just throwing things at them or using slingshots to make them fall. All of a sudden, one of our friends got hit, and then it suddenly moved and flew away. This manananggal looked like a skin and bones person. It had super long arms and wings, and its hair looked like corn silk. We screamed and ran, and our uncles came out with machetes. We saw it flying over the rice paddy. People searched for it, but it was never seen again. Hopefully it was just a bat, because, as I recall, my childhood friend threw something at it thinking it was a fruit because it was kind of red. It was an Indian mango that we were aiming for. When it got hit, it suddenly moved and flew towards us, and that's when we saw its appearance. It looked like a skeleton but with skin on its body, and it didn't have a lower body, so we concluded it was a manananggal, but we were puzzled because we thought they could only survive at night, because in the stories I heard, they only roam at night because they would burn or melt in the sun. We used to live in an ancestral house that was almost 100 years old. The ground floor was concrete, but the second floor was made of wood. It had ventanillas and capis sliding windows. The house was built by my great-grandparents. Our neighbors wouldn't look at our house at dawn. They said that there was a fat old lady sitting on a rocking chair on our terrace, and there was a large white dog sitting by her. They were seeing my great-grandmother, who I've only seen in pictures. I also experienced something that scared the living daylights out of me. It happened when I was around 5 years old. I was an only child back then, and the old Tarzan series aired around mealtime, so I stayed in our living room watching TV while my parents had dinner. One night, while watching TV, I felt scared and had goosebumps. I knew someone was watching me. I looked at the window to my left and saw a face staring from the window. It looked like a man, but his face was all muddy, and there was blood oozing from wounds on one cheek. I remember just staring at the face and feeling tears run down my face because I was scared out of my wits. I tried to close my eyes in the hopes that whatever it was would disappear. It was still there when I opened my eyes. I quickly ran to my parents and told them what I saw. It wasn't there when my dad checked. He even went outside our house but found nothing. That was the only time I saw that creature, but I still have nightmares about it more than 30 years later. So, my mother-in-law really believes in Aswang tik-tik, vampiric creatures, ghosts, superstitions, and other similar things. She was born and raised in Negros Oriental, and it was only when she moved to Manila that she started her own family. She has a strong intuition when it comes to these situations. Sometimes she'll wake up and ask who the man standing by the door is, or who went to the bathroom in the middle of the night, even though we're the only ones in the house. One time, around 10 p.m., it was raining heavily, and our gate and front door were already locked. But she suddenly sat up in her bed and told us that there was a woman crying next to her. In 2007, my wife was pregnant with our first child and she was due any day. We were living in a small compound somewhere in Pasig. There was an empty lot next to our house and behind it was a swamp. Around 4 p.m., we saw a dog wandering around the compound, but we didn't know who owned it. We knew all the dogs in the area and who their owners were, but this one was unfamiliar. It had wounds on its body, its left eye seemed blind, and it was limping as it walked while staring at us. My mother-in-law shouted at the dog and chased it with a bamboo stick. I asked her why she did that, but she didn't respond, so I didn't think much of it. Then, after 3 days, an old man was walking around the street in our compound, and guess what? He looked exactly like the dog, limping and blind in his left eye. We all saw it because we were selling fish balls, kikiam, and halo outside our house at the time, and my wife and I were taking care of the stand. My mother-in-law saw the old man and approached him. She asked where he was from and who he was looking for, but he didn't answer and just walked away, though he gave us a glance before leaving. I asked my mother-in-law what she thought about the man, and she said there was something strange about him. She said it was the first time she'd seen him, despite having lived in that compound for 15 years, while I had only recently moved there after marrying her daughter. That same week, my wife gave birth. My mother-in-law made a hammock for our baby. The hammock was placed near our window so you could reach it if you stuck your arm through. Our window had a sliding screen and a curtain. One night, my mother-in-law told us to go to sleep and that she would watch over the baby. Around 1 a.m., my wife and I were startled when we heard my mother-in-law cursing and shouting several times. We jumped out of bed in fear, thinking something bad had happened, and ran to where they were. When we saw them, my mother-in-law was holding our baby, staring at the window. We asked her what had happened, why she was cursing in the middle of the night. Was there a thief? She pointed to the window and said a hand had reached through the window, trying to grab our baby. That's when she started cursing, and the hand suddenly disappeared. I checked the window, pulled back the curtain, and saw that the sliding screen was still locked. There were no signs that it had been tampered with or anything. I asked her, "What hand? The window is locked." She said the hand looked black, with long, rotting nails, and it had a strange smell. The next morning I checked the window again and looked outside. That's when I realized there was a swamp behind our house. After that incident, we never put our baby in the hammock again and always kept her beside us when we slept. My mother-in-law has had many encounters like this since she was young. She's shared a lot of her experiences with us, and they're really terrifying. She also told us that she has something like a charm in her left arm, which she says her grandmother placed there to protect her from Mamba Barang, sorcerers, Encanto, spirits, and other entities. Hello, my name is James Rogers Lewis Jr. I'm recording this by voice text because, to be honest, typing isn't my strong suit. So here goes. I want to share with you something that happened to me, something that feels part vision, part out-of-body experience. It's hard to explain. It starts with my sister, who, before she passed, promised me that if there was a way to reach out from the other side, she would let me know. Growing up, life was chaotic. My mom passed out when I was just 5 years old and thought I was gone too, but thank God I made it. Over the years, though, I got heavily involved in drugs, spending more than 22 years of my life in and out of prison. I ran with some of the toughest crowds you could imagine. On December 18th, 2017, while I was in prison, I broke that promise to my sister. That night, I heard a guy sharing his testimony, and something in it struck me. Right there, I asked Jesus to come into my heart. Not long after, I was transferred to a higher security prison because I was caught with contraband. One day, while reading my Bible, I found myself staring at it, thinking, if this thing could talk, it could tell me so much. It's seen it all. Then suddenly, I wasn't in my cell anymore. I was standing in the middle of a bright field, and there was my sister, standing under a huge tree. Everything around us was so beautiful and radiant, more than words can describe. She looked at me and said, "Jamie Joe, you need to get your life together. You don't have much longer." I couldn't believe what I was seeing, and my first thought was that I'd died. I remember saying, "Oh my God, Penny, what are you doing here?" She reminded me of her promise, and then suddenly my mother appeared. She'd passed when I was 9, and I'd nearly forgotten what she looked like. Seeing her was overwhelming. She told me, "Jamie Joe, listen to Penny, please. For once in your life, listen. You don't have much longer, my son." Then I looked back at Penny, and she said again, "Remember, Jamie Joe, I kept my promise." And just then, a powerful, bright light appeared behind them, and I knew exactly who it was. My whole being hit the ground in reverence. I begged to go with them, desperate to follow that light. But then a massive gate started closing in front of me. I cried, pleading to go with them, to not be left behind. Then, a voice like thunder spoke from behind the gate saying, "I don't know you." I can't explain the heartbreak I felt at that moment. And just before the light vanished, Penny looked at me one last time and said, "Jamie Joe, you need to get your life together." Then, everything went dark. The next thing I knew, I was back in my prison bunk, soaked in tears, with one of my cellmates shaking me, asking if I was okay. I ended up crying uncontrollably for 3 days. Not long after, I got locked up in solitary. All I could do was read and pray, and that's what I did, mostly reading Revelation. Each word brought more tears, and I found myself face down on that cell floor, begging for forgiveness like I never had before. One night in that cell, I had a vision. I saw an angel. It was massive, with a fiery appearance like a warrior, something beyond what I can truly describe. The angel warned me that if I didn't choose Jesus, if I didn't turn my life around, I'd be left behind. It would be a long, hard road, but it would be worth it. He told me that if I chose to follow God, I would one day lead a great army to him. But he also warned that I'd face attacks along the way, and that it wouldn't be easy. Soon after, I began experiencing encounters with demons. They tried to convince me that I'd never make it to heaven. They claimed I was part demon, that I belonged with them, and they could give me anything I wanted on earth if I just joined them. I refused, though, telling them I knew Jesus. The demons laughed, and it was as if I could see the faces of people I'd known, even friends who had died, morphing in and out among them. Once, a fellow inmate said to me, "Man, you were speaking like I'd never heard before, like you were in a trance." I told him the truth, that I'd been in the middle of a field, surrounded by these demons, telling me I'd never make it. And as I looked around, there were burnt patches on the ground, except for the spot where I stood. Today, I'm a changed man. I pray that God keeps blessing me and that I continue to walk the path He's set for me, even if it's difficult. I'm sober now, and though life isn't easy, I'm beginning to understand that the dreams I've been having are warnings and messages. I'm grateful that God's given me the strength to keep going, and I'm praying that each part of this journey is used for something good. I know this is only part of my story, and I would be happy to share more of my testimony in the future. Thank you for listening, and may God bless you. Greetings in the name of Jesus Christ. My name is Adalbert Hamza, and I live in the UK. I'd like to share my testimony with you in the hope that other brothers and sisters in Christ may find comfort and feel the love of Jesus and the Holy Spirit through my story. For most of my life, I was lost in darkness, completely disconnected from faith, Christianity, or any knowledge of Jesus. My life was consumed by drugs, alcohol, and a porn addiction that eventually destroyed my marriage and left me feeling hollow. I thought these things were all that mattered in life, convincing myself that they were just a part of who I was. But 3 years ago, everything began to change. I started having encounters with the supernatural, experiences that I couldn't explain and didn't understand. These encounters led people around me to think I was mentally ill, and I was eventually admitted to a psychiatric hospital. I tried to explain what I was experiencing, but no one seemed to understand. It all sounded like nonsense to them. In those moments, I thought I was speaking words of comfort to others, words from people who had passed away. But I came to realize that it was demons using my voice, pretending to be the voices of the deceased. Even though I had imagined meeting Jesus, I continued using drugs, thinking they were my escape. I was always chasing that moment of peace, that feeling of love I'd once imagined, but I was only opening doors to demonic forces without realizing it. Then, one day, everything changed for good. I accepted Jesus into my life, and just recently I was baptized. With my hand on my heart, I can say that this was the best decision I've ever made. Since giving my life to Jesus, I feel His presence with me every day, comforting me and filling me with peace that I've never known before. Now, when I feel His presence, it's real. It's Him. And there's no need to seek comfort in anything else. His mercy has pulled me out of the darkest times, and I want everyone listening to know that Jesus loves them deeply. He has His hand over each of you, protecting and guiding you through whatever you face. So, my message is simple. Don't give up on your faith. Not now. Not in these final days. I pray that God blesses you and your families and brings peace to your hearts and homes. In the name of Jesus Christ, peace be with you. Amen. I was alone at home because everyone else was in the province, on vacation, and visiting a cousin who was dying of cancer. Even though I wanted to go with them, I couldn't because I had summer classes at university. This happened when my cousin was nearing the end of their battle with cancer. It was midday when all of a sudden, a thick smoke filled our house, covering all 3 floors. I was upstairs at the time, so I immediately ran downstairs, terrified because I thought something was on fire. The thought of our house burning down made me panic even more. But strangely enough, the smoke was white, and there was no smell of anything burning. I searched everywhere for the source, but there was nothing. Then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the smoke disappeared, as if nothing had happened. A few minutes later, my mom called to tell me that our cousin had just passed away. This was my experience with a tik-tik or Aswang. I'm not sure what you'd call it. Back when I was in high school, my friend and I were catching frogs in the rice fields because I wanted to try eating them. After we finished, we washed up at a water pump, but I slipped, hit my head, and started bleeding. I almost passed out. I didn't believe in Aswang at the time, but my friend told me to cover the wound because the smell of blood could attract them. My head was bleeding pretty badly, so I just laughed it off, saying, "You actually believe in Aswang? They don't exist." When I got home, I realized the wound was deeper than I thought. I cleaned it up and tried to get some sleep. Not long after, I heard a sound as if something was trying to tear off our roof, right above where my head was. I thought it might just be a cat, so I made noise to scare it away and even turned the TV to full volume. But the sound continued. So I decided to cover my wound with a pillow, and after that, the sound stopped completely. And that was it. Now, I believe there are things out there we can't easily explain, like the Aswang. Here's a recent encounter we had. We went back to our province, and every night we'd hang out at a small kubo, a hut, outside the house. It's the kind of hut built just for lounging on a hot day, close to rice paddies, with our ancestral home beside a hillside farm. My cousins and I were playing tongits and drinking gin. Then, we heard dogs barking loudly. At first it was faint and far off, like the dogs were out by the main road, but the barking grew louder and more intense, with more and more dogs joining in until the dogs right next door were going wild. We all froze because we thought maybe someone had snuck into the compound. The dogs still wouldn't stop, and then suddenly we felt something jump onto the roof of the kubo. We actually saw the roof dent under the weight. My cousins and I bolted, running as fast as we could. We were so panicked we couldn't even open the main house door right away. Just like that, our buzz was gone, and so was the pot money from our game. Our grandma later told us that she hears something heavy walking across the roof every night, heavier than just a cat, like she thought. Maybe it was curious because there were visitors around. In 2003, it was my mother's last month of pregnancy with our youngest sibling, and it was a bit risky. So, we decided to move to a place closer to her work. My mom is a public high school teacher, so even though we were new in the neighborhood, people knew us right away and welcomed us warmly. The house was small, a bungalow with wide jalousie windows. It had only one room, which was opposite the kitchen window, so you could see outside clearly. Just outside was a guava tree next to a wall that marked the edge of the compound. On the first night, we all slept together in that one room. I was near the door and could see the moonlight coming through the window, casting shadows of the tree. But what really struck me was the sound. There were so many bats outside. I could hear the constant flapping of their wings, and then they started scratching at the window glass. That's when I got really scared, because it felt like they wanted to come inside. I looked at my mom, and she was awake too, unable to sleep because she was frightened as well. The next morning, we told our landlady what had happened, and she advised us to sprinkle salt on the windowsills. She also placed a broom made of tingting, stiff palm fronds, outside to ward them off. That night, the landlady's husband stood guard outside, holding a machete, and the bats in the tree were gone. To this day, when my mom and I remember that night, we still get chills. It felt so surreal, like the stories were real. It's become a family joke now to say, the roof's like an airport with the wak-wak, Aswang, landing every night. But it was no joke. It was real. We often heard something landing heavily on our roof. One time, after hearing a loud thud, I yelled out, "What is this? We're practically neighbors." Suddenly, there were 3 loud bangs on the roof, like something was jumping around up there. After that, I never said anything again whenever I heard sounds from the roof. Another time, when my older sister was pregnant, we had a lot of nipa palms planted behind the house. It was around 1 a.m., and I was still awake studying for an exam. My dad was up too, keeping me company, while my mom and sister were already asleep on 2 beds pushed together. Suddenly, the nipa palms started rustling. We could see it clearly because the house was still under construction, and there were no glass panes on the windows yet. Then, we heard a strange, moaning sound, like a woman's voice, but I can't quite describe it. My dad and I looked at each other, and he signaled me to go lie down next to my pregnant sister. I hurried over and hugged her, thinking about how we'd been told that pregnant women have a scent that attracts wak-wak, Aswang. My mom and sister had no idea this was happening, but I'll never forget that night. Hello. I enjoy the stories shared here, and I wanted to share my own. This experience happened in 2011. So I'm from Singapore, and secondary 3 kids in my school would have a special community involvement program overseas to help orphans there, paint their school, etc. My class was selected to go to Batam. It was basically just a government-paid holiday for us, so we were all enjoying ourselves. We were staying in chalets. The chalets were bungalows widely spaced apart. My friend and I were told to share a chalet with a few others not from my class, so we didn't know them. We were told to go to the chalet house first. In Chinese culture, we're supposed to knock on the door of a hotel place we'd be staying in, but we were so excited we didn't bother knocking. We explored the different rooms and picked the largest one. We were greedy. It came with a toilet behind the room that only my friend and I were given access to. We would regret this decision because of what happened during the course of 2 nights. I decided I wanted to pee, so I went to the toilet. But when I went in, it was like the atmosphere had changed. I felt like someone was just staring at me, and I felt constrained for some reason, so I quickly left. Thinking it was just me being nervous in a new place, I didn't mention it to my friend. Later on, our other friend visited our chalet bungalow and told us she felt awful in that toilet. We went to sleep at around 11 p.m., and it felt like time was going so slowly for some reason. I would wake up feeling really refreshed and raring to go, only to see it was only 2 a.m., then 3:30, then 4 a.m. I also heard soft knockings from a nearby window. Meanwhile, my friend could hear breathing from behind her. I was sleeping facing her, so it was impossible for it to be me. But we just chalked it up to the room being weird and old. The second night was when went up the fan. Time was passing by slowly as usual, and I happened to look over at my friend. Instead of her, I saw that she had changed into someone else, someone larger and most definitely not my friend. She was petite. I also felt this heaviness around me, but I thought I was just hallucinating or something. I turned around to look at my phone to see what time it was, and then I saw a feline's eye from where the charger's light was supposed to be. At this point, I was seriously weirded out, so I just closed my eyes and tried to sleep. And suddenly, bang! The loud noise came from the toilet. On the first day, we had shut the door of the toilet because we didn't feel comfortable using it. I woke up and looked around, and for a moment, I wondered if my friend had gotten stuck in the toilet and needed help. But she was beside me sleeping. Bang! The sound was louder now and sounded angry. This time my friend woke up too and she asked, "Was that you?" And I replied, no. And we both yelled and got out of bed to run to the first floor. She jumped out towards the door, but I wasn't thinking straight at that point, and jumped out towards the toilet. The toilet's door was slowly opening, with a strange black mist coming out. When we got down to the first floor, we switched on all the lights and put the TV's volume up to as high as we could without waking the others. A final bang could be heard, with even greater intensity than the second. In the morning, we asked the other girls if they had heard anything at all during the night, and they said no, they slept very well. When we got back to Singapore, I asked other people who had stayed in other bungalows. They didn't experience similar things, but they did hear their tap noises in their toilets. But when they opened the door, there would be nothing. They also heard footsteps around the house. Until today, my friend insists that nothing would have happened if we had knocked on the doors to tell the spirits we were there. And we still don't know what that strange mist is. A demon? Local folklore spirit? If anyone has an idea, that would be great. My paranormal encounter in Bali, Indonesia. It happened on our last day in Bali, just on our way to the airport. We were staying in a villa in the middle of a rice field in Gianyar. It was so remote and secluded that most drivers have difficulty finding the villa. We had to leave the villa at 4 a.m. so we could arrive at the airport in time. On the way to the airport, my stomach suddenly started acting up, so I told the driver that we should stop by at the closest Alphamart, since they're usually open 24/7 and have toilets. At the Alphamart, my husband and I were welcomed by the cashier and the other staff. They pointed me to the toilet, so I went ahead and took care of business. This was a small branch, and the toilet is towards the back of the store. While I was in the toilet doing my thing, I could hear my husband chatting with the staff. Suddenly, the lights went out. I was screaming frantically because the light switch was outside. I screamed for my husband, legit loud screams, for about 30 seconds. Since no one came, I thought perhaps a new staff member came in and didn't know I was there. A few moments later, the light went on, so I continued with my business. Then comes the annoying knocking on the door, to which I responded with, "I'm almost done," each time. Probably 4 sets of knocks in a minute. When I came out, I saw a new staff member restocking a shelf. So I thought, this is probably the guy who turned off the light and knocked. We then bid our goodbyes to the cashier and the other staff member that welcomed us. In the car, I told my husband what happened and how annoyed I was that he didn't even come when I was screaming in the toilet. I also told him that I think it was the guy who was restocking the shelf who probably turned off the light and knocked multiple times. He said that he didn't hear me and that he was near the toilet the entire time. He didn't hear the knocks, and there was no one restocking the shelves. The entire time, it was me, him, and the other 2 staff members who were in the store. Our neighbor was rumored to be an Aswang, which my grandmothers also seemed to confirm. Although I tend to be skeptical and do not usually consider odd occurrences as supernatural, I have had plenty of stories about Aswangs. As a Visayan grandchild with a grandmother deeply rooted in superstitions, having been raised by parents from the early 1920s, I was familiar with the customs for warding off Aswangs, who are said to prey on animals, pregnant women, fetuses, and newborns. My grandmother practiced these protections, taking care to guard her grandchildren against supposed threats from Aswangs. We had been told that there was an Aswang living in a house beside us. An elderly woman from Leyte lived there, paralyzed and around 80 years old, who had somehow held on to life despite her condition. She usually sat outside, and as someone who deeply loves my grandparents, I could not help but ask the elders if she would be okay, considering her frailty. She finally passed away last year, and nearly all of our family and neighbors were convinced she had been an Aswang, something I found hard to believe until recent events. Many say that Aswangs do not usually target their neighbors but tend to travel farther for prey, although they might still be drawn to babies nearby. When my baby cousin was born, my aunt noticed a strange odor outside, which she described as smelling like a mixture of dead animals and fish, supposedly the smell of an Aswang. As someone who stays up late, I often ask my grandmother whether the strange sounds I hear at night or early morning are birds or something more ominous. She told me that if the sound is loud, it is far away, but if faint, it may be nearby. My grandmother even set up protective barriers with blessed oil, thorns, and salt, which supposedly helped reduce the strange events, especially after my cousin was baptized. Returning to the neighbor, my grandmother and her sister said that Aswangs today even attend church and no longer fear anything sacred. Since our ancestors were also from Leyte, they were familiar with these practices and experiences. My grandmother's sister said she recognized the woman as an Aswang from a single glance. She claimed that Aswangs tend to be uncomfortably warm to the touch, which matched with this woman's preference to stay outside despite having access to air conditioning indoors. The woman also had a small vegetable garden in her backyard, and my aunt claimed it was obvious that it was tended by an Aswang. My pregnant aunt avoided staying at the woman's house, fearing the old woman's fixation on her newborn. Even when she visited, she would cover herself in black, staying in a separate house behind the main one. The woman reportedly suffered multiple strokes, came close to death several times, even received anointing rites, but still managed to survive. After her passing, I asked my aunt, how did she die? Do Aswangs not only die when someone accepts their stone? In folklore, it is believed that Aswangs have a small stone or an egg-like object in their throat that must be passed on before they die. My aunt said it was likely that the woman's daughter had accepted this stone, as she seemed worn out from caring for her elderly mother. After her death, her family moved out, relocating to a remote area where it would be easier to live quietly. I often wondered about her supposed Aswang abilities. They suggested that perhaps she had been infected while in Leyte before moving south to Mindanao. I still do not know if she was truly an Aswang or if she was simply a victim of her circumstances. If she was, I would like to believe she never harmed anyone or caused the miscarriage that happened to my other aunt. Dogs, like people, seem to have different levels of sensitivity to the supernatural. A few years ago, I had 2 dogs, one older and more perceptive, the other young and playful. One morning around 6 a.m., my mother and I took them for a walk at a local park, a routine we had done many times. We always went early to let the dogs off leash without disturbing anyone. That particular morning felt different. The atmosphere was strangely heavy and eerie. Though it wasn't ghost month or anything unusual, the entire park felt engulfed in gloom. Despite the streetlights, the sky remained oddly dark, as if the sun refused to rise. It was mid-year, and by 6:30 a.m., daylight usually starts to break, but that morning there was no sign of it. The sky was clear, with no clouds in sight. As we walked, our younger dog, carefree as usual, roamed ahead. She went to sniff around a tree, and suddenly the branches began shaking wildly. We thought it could be birds, but there was no wind, and we couldn't see any. We continued walking, but my older dog, who usually stayed right by our heels, began acting up. She seemed unusually restless, and as we passed some hedges, I thought I saw a figure in white moving through them. I brushed it off, thinking it might be car lights from the nearby road. Neither my mother nor I scare easily, and we usually don't jump to supernatural explanations. However, my older dog then did something strange. She suddenly rammed into my legs, blocking my path. I tried to walk around her, wanting to catch up to the younger dog, who was now quite far ahead. But she blocked me again and then bolted back toward the car at full speed. I called for my younger dog and we started running after the older one, who kept charging ahead. The younger dog followed us, likely thinking it was a game. As we rushed back, the trees along the sidewalk began shaking as if something or someone was rattling their branches. The trees were small, only about 5 feet tall, and there was nothing visible to explain the movement. It felt as if the shaking was following us. At this point, we were staying as calm as possible, reciting a mantra under our breaths, believing, as our Hindu faith teaches, that negative forces cannot harm you if you remain calm and fearless. Remarkably, it was almost 7 a.m., yet there was still no daylight. We got the dogs into the car and drove straight home. Once there, we immediately prayed and blessed the dogs as well. Fortunately, nothing more came from this incident, though we have avoided that park before sunrise ever since. Our neighbors later mentioned that the park is rumored to have a resident Pontianak, though we didn't see or hear anything beyond what I described. The whole experience took place in silence, apart from the eerie sounds of the shaking trees and branches. If someone knocks on your door in the middle of the night, do not open the door. First ask, "Who's there?" or "Who are you?" If they don't answer, again, do not open the door and pray hard. I remember an experience from when I was in 3rd grade, back in 2003, on November 1st, just after midnight. We had just come back from the cemetery. My dad quickly stopped at the corner to buy some Baloo, while the rest of us, my mom, siblings, and I, went into the house. Once my dad came in, he was about to lock the main door when suddenly someone knocked on the screen door. Our door setup is this way. From outside it went screen door, thin curtain, main door, then inside of the house or kitchen. My dad couldn't see who knocked because of the curtain between the screen door and the main door, so he opened the screen door and stepped outside to check who it was. There was no one. Not a single soul in sight. My dad came back inside and locked the main door, but as soon as he sat down, someone knocked again. This time it wasn't on the screen door, which was made of steel and wire, but on the main door, which was wood. We all looked at each other as we ate our Baloo, terrified. My siblings and I started to cry in fear, and though my dad was clearly shaken too, he shouted, cursing at whoever was knocking on our door. From that night on, my parents put up a 6-inch figure of Jesus on the cross, hanging it on the door. Even now, despite all the renovations and replacing the old door, that cross still hangs on our main door. My name is Julie Meyer, and this is my testimony. The Lord came to me and said, "I want you to meet my friends." I felt a surge of joy, thinking I might soon meet Isaiah, Jeremiah, Peter, Zechariah, and Moses. Taking my hand, he lifted us into the sky, and we began flying in circles, like a scene from a cartoon. I wasn't afraid, even as we soared high above the earth. The breeze brushed my cheeks, and his hand held mine securely. Up here, far above the ground, I felt the wind's soft touch on my face and trusted his grip completely. But then, his expression changed. His gaze sharpened as he fixed his eyes on the earth below. Suddenly, we dove straight down toward the ground. I looked at him, noticing the intensity in his eyes and the determination on his face. Despite my trust, a wave of anxiety washed over me as we hurtled toward the earth at terrifying speed. Still, I clung tightly to his hand. We plummeted downward, moving so fast that it felt like we were breaking through every layer of the earth. My head pounded from the pressure, as if I were in an action movie. I heard the earth shattering around us, a deafening sound like a rocket blasting off. As we tore through soil and rock, I could see fire and feel my skin burning, as if my very flesh was being ripped apart by the earth. The pain was raw and intense, so real that it seemed to pierce through the dream. Finally, we broke through to the other side, emerging with my body torn and burning from the journey. I looked down and saw my skin shredded, feeling the pain vividly. Yet Jesus looked directly into my eyes, ignoring my wounds. Through the anguish, he said gently, "I want you to meet my friends." Tears stung my eyes, and I hoped he might notice my pain, comfort me, or even heal my torn skin. But he didn't. We found ourselves in a crowded place I'd never been, yet I sensed we were in India. The air smelled foul, and people were everywhere. Jesus moved forward, not looking at me, as if he wanted me to carry the weight of my pain. I noticed small children all around us as I continued to follow him, feeling the rawness of my torn skin with every step. There were young, beautiful girls in cages, and Jesus was with each of them, standing right beside them. The ones who seemed abandoned by the world were precisely those he called his friends. I saw children lying on the ground, fragile and weak, surrounded by flies. I watched them slip from this life into the next, and at the moment they passed, he was there for each one of them. Not a single one of them is forgotten in his eyes. The sorrow of what I was witnessing, combined with the lingering pain in my own body, overwhelmed me, and I began to cry uncontrollably. Jesus walked up to me and stopped in front of me, and I thought he might acknowledge my pain or comfort me. But instead he said, "Until your heart becomes as torn as your body, you do not know my friends." His words pierced me as I continued to see children suffering, mothers fading away, diseases spreading, and young girls being sold. Still, he repeated, "Until your heart is as torn as your body, you do not know my friends. You do not know me." Finally, when I was utterly broken and sobbing, he stepped close, looked into my eyes, and said softly, "It's time to dance." There was something powerful in the way he said it, as if the dance was his answer to all the pain. He began moving his feet in a steady, rhythmic dance, as though he were treading on injustice itself. His feet, marked with the scars of life and death, danced in a way that was both strong and defiant, trampling the suffering of his friends. He repeated, "Until your heart becomes as torn as your body, you do not know my friends. You do not know me." He took my hand again, and we moved toward the earth's core, where the pain in my flesh returned. I felt as if my very skin were being torn from my bones, and a deep rumbling echoed through me. Suddenly, we found ourselves in a clinic, in a doctor's office. My first instinct was to focus on the pain I felt, raw and unending, as though my skin was gone and only exposed nerves remained. But he looked at me and said once more, "I want you to meet my friends." I looked around and saw a trash bin filled with tiny bodies. Some of the babies were whole, others bruised or marked, and still others had eyes wide open, staring as if frozen in time. Shocked and heartbroken, I stood there as another baby was discarded, its tiny form falling lifelessly into the bin. I could feel the depth of the Lord's sorrow, and then he said, "Until your heart is torn like your flesh, you do not know my friends. These are my friends." In that moment, his voice rose with a strength that shook me. "Oh, those forgotten by the world, you are not forgotten, you are not forgotten, you are not forgotten." In a silent hall on earth, they cried out, a voice that captured the attention of the Almighty God. Though silent here, their cries filled the corridors of eternity. Day and night, night and day, they held the attention of heaven, of the Almighty. I felt a surge within me, and I began to shout, "You're not doing this in vain, Lou. You're not doing this in vain, Lou Engel. You're not doing this in vain." Through the hall of eternity, I saw that heaven knew Lou Engel by name. Lou knew the friends of the Lord. I could hear the unending cries of babies echoing in the corridors of heaven. Though forgotten on earth in eternity, they had a voice. They cried out, asking for justice from those with earthly power, night and day. Their cries demanded justice against those who wronged them, holding the Father's attention. The Lord looked me in the eyes and said, "Until your heart is torn as your flesh is now, you do not know my friends. You do not know me." I stood there, sobbing. Then he came close and in a low voice said, "It's time to dance." He began a new dance, his feet moving with purpose as he tread on the high places of the earth, and here, in the center of an abortion clinic. Each step was powerful, filled with intent. Every time I felt most broken, he would say, "It's time to dance. It's time to make war. To dance is to wage war." His feet stomped out a new rhythm, a judge trampling injustice. He said, "Wait until the earth joins me in this dance. A small part already has, and I invite all to join. But you can only dance when your heart is torn and broken." He came near me again and said, "I want you to meet more of my friends." Once more we journeyed through the depths of the earth. My heart felt shattered, and my skin felt as though it had been torn by an explosion. We found ourselves walking down a crowded street, and he walked ahead of me, setting a pace I could hardly keep. The pain in my body intensified, and I wanted him to slow down, but he didn't. He wanted me to feel it, to let the pain settle into my heart until I could claim it as my own. I sensed we were in Israel. As we walked, he would tilt his head to greet someone as if to say, "Hi" or "Shalom." He said nothing aloud, just tilted his head, meeting each gaze before bowing slightly. After each greeting, I would look at the person he acknowledged, knowing each was someone he called his friend. I saw their eyes widen as we passed. In an instant, I could see into their souls where a light flickered on. Jesus was opening the eyes of their hearts, allowing them to truly see him, the Messiah. As we walked along, I watched this spark ignite within them, a small flame of revelation beginning to burn. I recognized that some of the people he greeted with a nod were prominent figures in the Jewish community, rabbis. With just a glance and a slight bow of his head, Jesus revealed himself to them, and I saw their understanding awaken, the flame deepening within. We followed these rabbis to the upper rooms of their homes, where they fell to their knees shouting, "This changes everything! It changes everything!" The Lord approached them and gently blew on the coals of revelation in their hearts. Little by little, the small flame grew into an unquenchable fire, a fire that burned like a fire locked in their bones. I saw that this flame would continue until the appointed day when they could no longer hold it in, and from the heights of the mountains they would cry out, "Yeshua is the Messiah! Yeshua is the Messiah!" I remembered praying for this very thing in our small prayer meetings in Kansas City, that Jesus would appear here, in his glory, and he truly was. I looked up and for the first time saw his face streaked with tears. I heard him whisper, "O Jerusalem, O Jerusalem." In that moment, I felt his boundless love for Israel, like the heartache of a lover when their love is unreturned. He turned to me and said, "Until your heart is torn like your flesh, you do not know my friends, you do not know me." In the depths of my being, I felt his passion for Israel, like Jacob's love for Rachel, like Elkanah's love for Hannah. But his love went far beyond anything human. Tears streamed down my face, and though the salt stung my wounds, I couldn't stop. Just when I thought I couldn't bear it anymore, I sank to the ground. He leaned close and said softly, "It's time to dance." Suddenly, we were standing before the Western Wall. He began that rhythmic dance again, his perfect feet moving in ways I had never seen. Each time I reached my lowest, when pain and exhaustion overwhelmed me, he would say, "It's time to dance." I felt the power of this dance as he crushed injustice beneath his feet. Watching him, the Son of God, spin and dance on the injustices of this world was extraordinary. He kept saying, "It's time to dance, it's time to dance." A new dance is coming, a dance born from our worship and our hearts for the poor of the earth, for those who seem forgotten, but whom the Lord calls his friends. And just when we are most demoralized, that's when it's time to dance. What a sight it is. The King of Kings and the Judge of the earth begins to dance, crushing injustice with his perfect scarred feet, the scars of his passion. This is no ordinary dance. It's a true, powerful crushing. It's time to dance. In my dream, as we walked through the streets of Jerusalem toward the wall, I knew he was revealing himself even while he danced. I saw the wide-eyed faces of key rabbis in the Jewish community, their hearts beating with new understanding. I saw how the Lord placed within them a deep, undeniable knowledge that he alone is the Messiah. A chosen day is coming, a day when these rabbis will no longer be able to contain it. They will run to the heights of Jerusalem, declaring aloud throughout the city, "Yeshua is the Messiah, Yeshua is Messiah. Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord," I heard in my heart. Right now, these rabbis guard this revelation, questioning if what they've seen is true. But the plan is already in motion. Soon, he will appear, opening the eyes of the people's hearts, igniting a fire in their bones. I've seen these rabbis overwhelmed with the word of the Lord, declaring his return. It is happening now, unfolding exactly as the Lord wills. This is happening today. Jeremiah chapter 20 verse 9 says, "When I say I will not mention his word or speak any more in his name, his word is in my heart like a fire shut up in my bones." Then he looked at me and said once more, "Until your heart is torn as your flesh is now, you do not know my friends."